So one of your employees has requested an accommodation. This brief video will walk you through the steps of the accommodation process and let you know what to expect along the way. I'm Jamie Roth, and I'm here with Josh Bollendorf. He's Gateway's Director of Compliance and the ADA Coordinator. So Josh, let's start out. Just explain briefly this process from the employee's point of view.
Yeah, so your employees request an accommodation, and so they fill out a form. We have an initial discussion, and then I often reach out to the supervisor, and then I have another conversation with the employee while we're pending their medical information to determine the nature and extent of their disability and how that specifically impacts their ability to do their job. So I'm working with them, and then I reach out and work with the supervisor as well.
So give me more details on what the supervisors can expect from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this process really is one between the ADA coordinator, myself, and the employee to work through. The supervisor is consulted on a couple of different occasions. The first to determine what accommodation is reasonable. And so that's an assessment I have to make to determine if what we are requesting is able to be done within your department and division. And this also often requires outside the box thinking. And so a task may have always been performed in a particular way, or you may have a preference as a supervisor for it to be performed in this particular manner. But for a person with a disability, we have to go beyond that. And as long as they're able to perform that job, the way and nature that it's done might need to be different than what you would necessarily prefer for an employee. And so we have that initial conversation, and we talk about those accommodations. We determine the reasonableness, and then I have another conversation with the employee, and then we kind of finalize those accommodations. I let the supervisor know that, and often that's done in form of a letter. While your employee is pending this ongoing accommodation process, there may be temporary workplace adjustments that are put in place, and they may be similar or different from what we ultimately decide is a workplace accommodation. And there will be a letter that's provided in those cases as well.
Okay. What happens if I, as a supervisor, don't agree with the accommodation request?
Well, we'll have that conversation, and we'll look at, and I'll try to explain why we are doing a particular accommodation, how that really allows the employee to perform those job functions. And in the end, ultimately, the accommodation process is determined by the employer and the ADA coordinator. And if we put something in place that's reasonable, that's not creating an undue hardship, and that is effective for the employee, that's the accommodation that employee is entitled to under the law.
Does the supervisor have a right to know the details of the disability?
Unfortunately, no. And people may be curious. It may in some ways be helpful to kind of understand that. But again, that conversation is something that I have with the employee specifically. That confidentiality under the state and federal law is quite high. And so only the ADA coordinator is able to collect that medical documentation and know the nature and extent of an individual employee's disability. A supervisor should not ask an employee about their disability, should not ask specifics about an accommodation, and should not share any of that information with another employee or anybody else at the college under any circumstance. That would be a violation of our policy as well as the law. And so we want to make sure we're compliant with that. And also, more importantly, I believe, is to respect that employee's right to their privacy, especially of a disability.
All right, so we know what we shouldn't do. What should we do as a supervisor to help support an employee through this?
We send out an accommodation letter. It has a lot of information in there, and it tells you as a supervisor what you can do to support your employee. One is to help them work through their accommodations that we put into place. So if they have an additional need, you can bring that back to my office and we can have that conversation with the employee. If your employee is informing you that they're having difficulty, that is a sign that they need to have their modifications done to their accommodation, and again, refer them back to my office. Another way of supporting them is making sure rumors aren't being spread throughout the office about an accommodation. And also, one of the most frequent bits of feedback that I hear from supervisors and some pushback against certain accommodation is the concern that other employees will view that differently. Well, you're treating that person different. Under the law, a person with a disability is entitled to that differential treatment so that they can access the equal opportunity of employment and employment benefits. We provide the supervisor with some great information on how to deal with those particular situations and to help the employee feel comfortable in the workspace with their accommodation.
Excellent. From the time an employee submits the paperwork for the accommodation until it's in place, what type of a time frame are we looking at?
Yeah, the time frame is variable. It can be from weeks to months, but we try to get everything done as soon as possible. 2 weeks on average is, I think, our accommodation implementation time frame, but it also depends on how quickly a provider returns documentation to our office, and then the extent and nature of the disability. There are some disabilities that are super easy to accommodate. An employee has a back issue, the doctor sends the paperwork back in a couple of days, and they put a adjustable desk arm or a desktop workplace in place, and then we're done. That's easy. There's other employees who have conditions that may be more difficult to accommodate, or a job that is much more complex that requires us to do a lot of interactive process, going back and forth and having these discussions. And so that could take a little bit longer, but I have yet to take more than 3 weeks or so in putting accommodations in place.
Excellent. Very, very good. Thank you for all this information. You've always, you're great at providing this easy way to get through these difficult things. And to all of you watching, as you're going through this process, you might have additional questions. Of course, reach out to Josh if you need to have any questions answered, any assistance throughout this whole thing. Thanks for watching.